He won't forget us. And yet we as human beings, we do tend to forget things, and even good things in our lives. So we need to be reminded often. I appreciate that, and thank you. Last week we started a lesson or a sermon on solving problems God's way, and it was kind of the second part of a message, and got maybe long-winded in it and talking, but we started talking about 5 things or 5 reasons that problems come into our lives, and we wanted to look at the real reason or the real purpose or the real problem and not just the symptoms of our lives. And so we looked at the first one was our disobedience, us being disobedient to God. And by being disobedient to God, we bring problems into our own lives. We bring God's judgment in our lives. And so sometimes the problems that we have to deal with is based on our disobedience and God allowing things to come into our lives to get us back on track, to get us to come back in line with Him. And then we looked at the second one was sometimes problems come because of our obedience. It has nothing to do with disobedience. It's the fact that I am obeying God. And because I'm obeying God, I'm basically going opposite of the world. And it's kind of, we didn't use the illustration last week, but it's like a salmon trying to swim upstream. Everybody else is going in the opposite direction, and that salmon is trying to go upstream compared to the rest of the fish. And so as Christians in life, the same thing will happen to us. If we're trying to serve God and we're trying to please God, and we're moving in the direction God's calling us to, the majority of people are going to be going the opposite direction of us. And we saw that. We used Daniel as one example. And they said that the only fault they could find in Daniel was that he would serve as God. They would make a decree that everybody had to bow down to the king, and Daniel says, I won't do that. And so by finding fault in Daniel and his relationship with God, could they stumble him up or try to trip him up. And Daniel said, that's okay, I'll continue to pray 3 times a day, as he had in the past. And then the last one we looked at last week was that Satan will attack you. And Satan will try to put things into your life. Satan will try to trip you up in your relationship with God. And sometimes he'll bring problems into your life. The thing we mentioned with Satan, though, is Satan is a created being. He was created by God. And Satan, in order to come and try you and to put problems in your life, has to get permission from God first. And God's only going to allow those things. He says, I'll never give you more than that you are able. So God's not going to allow problems to come into your life that you're not prepared for, that you haven't been prepared and ready to take that test. And so we need to understand some of those things. And we looked at Peter last week when Christ told him Satan will attempt to sift him as wheat. And he says, but I have prayed for you. And so understand that God's on our side. God is rooting for us. God's trying. He's preparing us. He's trying to get us to move in the right direction. And sometimes, though, we as humans, we forget. And we get our eyes on something else. And we begin to get ourselves into trouble. So I want to look at the last 2. I don't know if we'll make it further than that tonight. But the last 2 from last week's was, number 4 is the enemies. Our enemies will try to trip us up. And if you want to go ahead and turn with me to Psalm 143. And it wasn't my purpose to, bring the Wednesday night message into Sunday night, but as I thought on this week, it just kept coming back. Our enemies in life will try to trip us up. And so David was pursued by his enemies. And in Psalm chapter 3, verse 1, David says, Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. And David's asking guys, like, I've got enemies everywhere. All these people are against me. And why is it increased? Why do they trouble me? And then in Psalm 9:13, David says, have mercy on me, O Lord. Consider my trouble, which I suffer of them that hate me. And so understand, Christian, that there's going to be people that hate you. There's going to be people that are enemies, spiritually speaking. And they're going to try to trip us up. They're going to come into our lives and they're going to cause problems. But if you remember, and for those that weren't here maybe on Wednesday night, Psalm 143, notice there where David is crying out in verse 1, hear my prayer, O Lord. Give ear to my supplications. In thy faithfulness answer me, and in thy righteousness. And enter not into judgment with thy servant. For in thy sight shall no man living be justified. And here's where we pointed out, verse 3, for the enemy. That is singular there. The enemy hath persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness, as those that have been long dead. And so again, goes back to our last point last week, is that Satan will try to trip us up. Satan himself will put things into our lives to cause problems. But then notice we said down in verses 9 and 12, David again is praying. He's crying out to God, deliver me, O Lord, from my enemies. It's plural there. I flee unto thee to hide me. Verse 12, and of thy mercy cut off mine enemies, and destroy all them that afflict my soul, for I am thy servant. So David runs back to God, and he's asking on behalf of a servant of God that God would take care of his enemies. And the enemies being plural. And the fact that we pointed out in Wednesday night was that, yes, Satan is the singular enemy of the Christian, and Satan's going to do what he can. But then on the other side of it, our enemies are plural because Satan will use anybody he can to trip us up. And we talked about it being whether it's somebody that has a little bit of a bitter spirit, and something we say or do, or maybe it was an action, or we forgot to thank them for something, and they allow that seed of bitterness to take root. And next thing you know, they're not talking to you. And that bitterness just continues to grow, and all it is Satan allowing somebody or some little event in life to begin to grow a gap between Christians. And we start to lose that unity, and we start to have problems. And if we're not careful and we're not willing to fix that, we can lose that relationship. And so with David here, we see that it's his enemies. He's asking God in Psalm 3 and in Psalm 9 and here in Psalm 143 to help him. And he's wanting to understand what's going on. And so we also know that Saul, throughout David's life, after David had killed Goliath and everything that he had done, they come back from the battle, and the crowd is singing, and they're out there, David's dancing, and they say, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. And so that little bit of jealousy got into Saul's heart and began to take root. And a little bit of jealousy ruined a relationship between David and Saul. And so those things it can be little things that become a big deal. And it can be those small things. But understand that there are enemies in our lives that are going to try to trip us up. If you would turn to Nehemiah, a couple books back to the left. After 2 Chronicles, you'll have Ezra and then Nehemiah. Sometimes they don't need a reason. And that was, I believe, we could see as well in our example of Daniel. Daniel was a faithful man. Daniel was working in the king's court. Daniel was doing everything he was asked to do. But they needed a reason. They were looking for a reason. And thankfully, David was faithful. They couldn't find a reason in his shortcomings. He wasn't cheating the government. He wasn't taking shortcuts at work. Daniel was doing everything he was supposed to do. The only way they were going to trip up Daniel was, again, to cause a problem in his walk with God. But Daniel said, I purpose in my heart that I will not defy God. I will not defile myself. And so we need to understand that needs to be a purpose in our hearts. Again, not always as easy to do it as it is to say it. And now here in Nehemiah, I stopped at Ezra, that topic. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse number 1, notice that the children of Israel are doing a good thing. They're coming back there to build the walls, and it says in Nehemiah 4:1, but it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we builded the wall, he was wroth, and took great indignation and mocked the Jews. And understand the mentality maybe of the world, the mentality of those that aren't Christians. When they find out you're a Christian, if they can get in that and start picking on that, they're going to do it. And the fact that because the children of Israel were doing what was right, it made them wroth. And I believe I shared with you a testimony of a guy I was talking to, and he said that he wasn't saved, and he would see a bumper sticker that says Jesus loves you. And just reading that bumper sticker, he said he would become furious inside. And he said he had a friend of his that was the same way. And they would just mock and make fun and who's this person thinking? Jesus doesn't love you. And just the amount of hate that just seeing Jesus loves you would cause in somebody's heart. And that's what's happening here. Sanballat heard that we builded the wall. He was rough. He took great indignation. He didn't sleep. He got heartburn over it. And he mocked the Jews. He made fun of them. He spake before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what do these feeble Jews? Will they fortify themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they make an end in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which is burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was by him, and he said, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall even break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. and turn the reproach upon their own head, and give them for a prey in the land of captivity. Cover not their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out from before thee. For they have provoked thee to anger before the builders. So we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. But it came to pass that when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabians, and the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the wall of Jerusalem were made up, and that the breaches began to be stopped, then were they very wroth, and conspired all of them together to come into fight against Jerusalem, and to hinder it. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God, and set a watch against them day and night because of them. So understand again in this is that our enemies are going to do everything they can to trip us up or to stop us or to cause problems in our lives. They're going to do what they can to get us to stop the work of God. And if I get more focused on what somebody's saying about me, then I lose my focus on serving God. If I'm more worried about them making fun of me, then I lose my focus on God and serving Him. And so we have to just allow those things to go by. And we see, both in David's case, in Psalm 143, what's David do? Runs to God, cries out to God, oh God, help me. God, take care of my enemies. And remember, we pointed out Wednesday night, what was David's concern? God, I'm at the end of my rope, and I want to maintain my testimony. God, don't give my enemy the victory. And here we see the same thing. What did they do? They turned to God, and they poured their hearts out before God. They turned their enemies over to God. And notice again, verse 9, He gives God the glory. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God, and we set a watch against them day and night because of them. So, Christian, understand as well that we still have responsibility in life. Yes, we turn things over to God, but yes, God has given us responsibility in the work that we need to do. The Jews hindered in the rebuilding of the wall here in Nehemiah. We could throw out the idea of Joseph and his brothers. We've kind of used them as an example. Daniel, and he was having trouble with his enemies because he did what was right. But we'll also notice here, lastly, is that Jesus had enemies. His enemies caused him trouble, and troubles were not the result of his disobedience. He was without sin. He would never disobey. But it was because of who he was. And so I'll read you a couple of verses here. John 15:18 says, if the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. So Christ's enemies hated him. If we submit to Christ, and if we love Christ, and we're sharing the same gospel, right? Sharing the same message, it only stands to be that they're going to hate us. 1 John 3:13, he says, marvel not, my brethren, if the world hate you. It shouldn't take us by surprise. And we could spend a whole message on verses in Scripture where it tells us that the world's going to hate us, that there will be persecution, that there will be trouble because of who we are and because of our relationship with Him. Matthew 10:22, he says, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And I was reminded once we did with the teens at Open Door, we did a Christmas float. And I thought we did a great job. The teens spent a lot of time preparing the float. They painted it. It looked nice. And to me, it was the nicest float out there because I helped build it. But it was my teens. My teens had spent time doing it. My teens poured their heart into it. It was all about Christmas. When all these trucks had store-bought lights and store-bought stuff, and we had built a big box that looked like a present, and it said, Jesus, the greatest gift of all. But the pastor reminded me, the world doesn't love you. The world's not on the same side you are. You're not going to be picked over somebody else. And so understand, and that's frivolous, but the fact of the matter is, they like the commercialism. They like what the world portrays as Christmas. They don't want to know the message. Jesus is the reason. Jesus, the real gift. And so, it may surprise us, but it shouldn't, that our enemies are going to hate us because of who we are and because of what we stand for. And we've preached messages as well in the last month or so. When you speak truth, people don't like truth. And you would think they would want to know the truth. You would think that the truth would be what sets us free, right? But that's not what they want to hear. And so sometimes God will allow our enemies to put some things in our lives. But we understand as well that in and through it all, God is simply growing us. He's giving us, growing our faith. He's allowing our confidence in Him to simply become better. The fifth one I want to hit is parents, irresponsible parenting. can cause problems in our lives. And again, some problems are caused by poor parenting. And kids will stop right there. It doesn't give you an excuse to not obey your parents. It doesn't give you an excuse to drop out of church. It doesn't give you an excuse not to do the things you know what are right. The Bible says honor and obey your parents. Nothing takes away the kid's responsibility to God. But parents, understand and realize the important role you play in the lives of your children. Understand that the decisions you make can affect your children. No excuses for them not to do what's right, but they will use that excuse at the first opportunity they get. Ezekiel 18, 1 through 20, we could read through there. Each man, the Bible says, is responsible for his own sin. One of the commentaries I read, he says, we have already noted that the Lord doesn't punish the children and grandchildren because of the ancestors' sins, Ezekiel 18, but he can permit the sad consequence of those sins to affect future generations, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And we know there's places throughout Scripture, he says, I will visit this to the second and third generations. And so our decisions, the choices we make, we answer for our sin, but those consequences and some of the long-term effects of those can affect our children and our grandchildren. Children are prone to imitate their parents. In Bible times and in Eastern cultures, people lived in extended families, sometimes 3 or 4 generations in a home, and not necessarily that uncommon today, even in our culture. And so it's easy to see that the older members of the family have huge opportunity to influence the younger ones. And I would say even so with us, just 4 people in a home. The amount of time I spend with my boys, I see them doing things that I know I haven't taught them, but I see them imitating me. And I'll give you an example of this. The other night, I don't even know why, I was sitting there and I started to eat with my left hand, just kind of goofing around. Then I kept doing it because I'm like, oh. And I look over and Sammy's eating left-handed. I never eat left-handed. I do a lot of things both-handed. I try to keep both hands active. But he's sitting there imitating me. He didn't say anything. He wasn't necessarily just staring at me, but he was picking up on one little thing I was doing. And that is one example. There's other things that I do every day that I never teach them, but I see them doing it, and I look and say, man, I do that. That's me. And they're simply imitating me. So be careful, parent. Understand the effect you have on your kids and grandkids that look up to you. And the shoes that they're filling, be careful of the steps that you leave behind. But the Lord also blesses successive generations of people who honor and obey Him. Again, we know there are kids that drop out and they have their own free choices. They have free will and they're able to make the decisions that they want. But let's be careful to make the best decisions we can. Let's be careful to influence them in the best way, in the right way that we can. It's not the child's fault all the time. It's not their disobedience, maybe. It's not maybe their obedience. And we could say maybe it's not Satan. It could be the influence of a poor parent. I'll give you a couple examples. How about a father that's an alcoholic? What does he bring to the home? A wife that lives in fear, just waiting on him to come home and angry and upset. He spent the paycheck on some alcoholic beverage. Brings a lot of problems to the family. The little kids that listen in the bedroom and hear everything that goes on. How about maybe the mother that's addicted to something, and she brings those emotional and just mental and that drain back to the home. There's a lot of consequences. There's a lot of effects that those things have on our children that we need to be careful with. And we all would say, yes, amen, amen. When we hit on the alcohol and on the drugs and the cigarettes and whatever else, those are the big sins, right, in Christianity. But what about us? What about the parent that speaks bad of other Christians at lunch? Oh, did you see what she said? Did you see what he was wearing? Did you see that what the pastor said today? And that gets into their ears as well. And they're going to take that with them. So we're teaching them all kinds of things. How about the father that doesn't faithfully attend church? How about the one that puts other pursuits first? I've heard Sunday school teachers, when it comes time to go hunting season comes around, they'll teach Sunday school faithfully all year long until hunting season comes, and then something becomes a priority. We have to be careful with those things, because what is a priority to us becomes way much more than that to our kids. And so understand, there is, I believe, a balance. Those things aren't bad in and of themselves, but we need to be careful with them. What makes us think, though, that they won't imitate this behavior as well as some of the other ones? Sometimes the actions of parents have lingering consequences throughout the life of a person. Because the parents didn't teach the value of hard work, a child can grow up poor and struggle to survive. If a child is physically abused by their father, he or she will have a hard time experiencing the love of God in his or her life. And it could be a parent, it could be a relative. It can cause a lot of issues. The unforgiveness of a parent can cause lingering consequences in the life of a child. And a lot of times brings bitterness and poor choices. They make poor choices based on the bitterness in their hearts because of how a parent treated them. And so some lessons from life maybe that we can take from the remainder of last week's message is problems are inevitable in our lives. We've already established that fact. We are going to have problems. There's going to be problems that come into our lives. And so biblically, we want to take a biblical stance. We want to look at them biblically. Some will be caused by us and our disobedience. Some by enemies of ours. Some by Satan when he's allowed. And some by our obedience to God. Some, I believe, will be inherited by our parents. You'll never reach a plateau. You and I will never reach a place where we no longer have problems this side of glory. The Scripture told us that. In this life, John, 16:33 we were looking at the last couple of weeks. In this life, you will have problems. You will have issues. You'll have enemies. And Job says that a man that is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble. And so we know that those things will come. Number two, because we bring some problems upon ourselves by our disobedience, we can rid ourselves of those problems. We can obey God. We can fix the times when we are disobedient. We don't need to pray for God's deliverance in those things. We simply need to quit disobeying Him and get back on track. We don't have to live with all of our problems. We can choose not to disobey God and live a happier life. We can rid ourselves of many problems simply by being obedient to the Word of God. Number three, when we only deal with the symptoms of a problem, we delay the real solution. Remember we talked about David last week. When David committed adultery, he began by dealing with the symptoms of his problem. Some of the symptoms we listed, he called Uriah from the front lines to come home and spend the night with his wife. He was simply dealing with a symptom. He was trying to cover his sin. When he assisted Uriah in going home and trying to get him to go spend the night, he was dealing with his symptoms. When he had Uriah sent to the front line of the battle so that he would be killed, he's dealing with a symptom. He wasn't yet dealing with the problem and the root problem. When David took Bathsheba to be his wife, he again was simply dealing with symptoms. David's problem was his sin, the sin of committing adultery. And so turn with me now to Psalm chapter 32. Get a little bit to your right, Psalm 32. Again, looking in at least one of the commentaries, it said that he had about a year that David had been dealing with this guilt. It consumed him. It was eating away at his insides. And notice what David says here in Psalm 32. Beginning in verse 1, he says, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man unto whom the Lord imputeth not iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile." So David's saying, look, when in the man that his transgressions are forgiven, whose sin is covered by the blood of God, covered by the blood of Christ, his transgressions are forgiven, they're covered, that man is blessed. The man that is willing, unto whom he says, verse 2, the Lord imputeth not iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile, that man is blessed. And so when we're willing to confess our sins, when we're willing to get those right with God, you become the blessed man. But notice what he says in verse 3. When I kept silence, before I admitted my sin, before I was willing to confess it, when I kept silence, my bones waxed old, through my roaring all the day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is turned into the drought of summer. Selah. So David says, stop again. Stop and think about it. I was unwilling to confess my sins. I was on my own program. I was dealing with sin my own way. I was trying to hide it. I was trying to cover it up. And it was tearing me apart. It was drying out my bones. The moisture inside me was turned to the drought of summer. Stop and think about it. Now notice verse 5. I acknowledged my sin unto thee, and mine iniquity have I not hid. I said, I will confess my transgressions unto the Lord, and thou forgavest the iniquity of my sin. Selah. So I confess my sin. I acknowledge my sin before God. I I agreed with God that what I had done was wrong and that I deserved the consequences. And he says, thou forgavest me the iniquity of my sin. Again, see love. Stop and think about it. What a good God. And we mentioned that this morning in our lesson on Jonah in Sunday school. He says, I am a God of grace and a God of mercy. A God that is willing to forgive. And we simply need to come to him and avail ourselves of that forgiveness and allow him to take away those things. Allow him to make it right. And then David says there in verse number 6, for this shall every one that is godly pray unto thee in a time when thou mayest be found. Surely in the floods of great waters they shall not come nigh unto him. Thou art my hiding place. Thou shalt preserve me from trouble. Thou shalt compass me about with songs of deliverance. Selah. Once we confess those sins and God makes things right, we make things right with God and God forgives us and he cleanses us, we get our song back. We get the joy of our salvation back. He says then in verse 8, I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye. Be ye not as the horse or as the mule, which have no understanding, whose mouth must be held in with bit and bridle, lest they come near unto thee. Many sorrows shall be to the wicked, but he that trusteth in the Lord, mercy shall compass him about. Be glad in the Lord, and rejoice, ye righteous. Shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. And David's saying, I learned a hard lesson. And it'd be so much easier for you to learn it from me. You don't have to go through it on your own. You don't have to suffer the consequences. Learn it from me. And David says, because I've been through these things, I will teach you. I will share with you my experiences, the consequences I went through. He says, don't be stubborn. Don't be like a mule. Don't be like the horse that has to be bridled and has to be drugged and forced to go different ways and to do what we wanted to do. And then again, verse number 11, be glad in the Lord and rejoice, ye righteous. Shout for joy, all ye that are upright in heart. When we're right with God, we'll have joy in our hearts. We'll be willing to sing. We'll shout with joy. We'll be excited about the relationship we have with him. Don't allow guilt to destroy you. God has a remedy for guilt, confession and repentance. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Did David continue to experience problems after his confession of sin? Sure. Yes, he did. But David confessed and forsook his sin. He didn't allow the guilt to keep him from being a man after God's own heart. And then tonight, just with the time we have left, let's look at one more thing. Matthew chapter 5. Let's look how Jesus deals with the root cause of problems. Maybe there's an example for us. Matthew chapter 5. When David finally was willing to deal with the root, he was able to get rid of that problem. He was able to make it right with God and to live, again, with joy in his heart. And here in Matthew chapter 5, we see where Jesus deals with the root cause, and he distinguishes between the problem and the symptom. Look in verse 21 and 22 with me. Let's read 21 through 28, and then we'll come back and kind of go down through here. Matthew 5, verse 21, he says, Jesus speaking, he says, Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother, without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, Thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly, whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence, till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And so we want to look at two different things here. One is what he's saying in verses 21 and 22 about anger, about hating somebody in our life. And then we'll look at the second part there about committing adultery. Jesus says in verses 21 and 22 that there is a surface problem, but there's also a root problem. Notice again he says, Thou shalt not kill, verse 21. But I say unto you, that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. So what he's saying is, murder is what we see. Murder is the result of what's in the heart. Anger is the root problem. Anger is what's in the heart and causes that person to commit murder. Murder is actually a symptom of something deeper. There's something beneath the surface that we don't see. In other words, the act of murder is what we see. And when somebody kills somebody on the street, and usually it's out of anger, right? He pulled into my parking spot. He knew I was headed there first. And they shoot him. I can't remember. Somebody was telling me the other day, I think they were arguing over a cigarette, and the guy pulled out a knife and stabbed the other guy and killed him. Crazy stuff that happens over a cigarette. Anger, uncontrolled anger in somebody's heart. And Christ is speaking here. He says, I'm not telling you, it's not just the act of murder that is wrong. It's when you've got the act of murder. It's when you've got the anger so deep in your heart. You don't have to commit the actual act of killing somebody, when in your heart, if you had opportunity, you would do so. The feelings inside would be the same as killing them. And Christ is saying, be careful with that stuff. There's a root problem, and we only see the symptom of it. There's something beneath the surface, something that causes a person to murder, and it's anger. Albert Barnes says that anger is that feeling that we have when we are injured, and which prompts us to defend ourselves when in danger. In the schools, when I'm teaching the 5th grade classes, I tell them the same thing. We all have the emotion of anger. We all have the emotion of being excited and happy. When I get a 100 on a spelling test, and I got a 100 on my spelling test, and we all get excited. When I didn't study and do so well, Mom's going to be mad, right? And so the different emotions, we're all built that way. God's given us the ability to experience emotions, to be excited, to be happy, to experience sadness. But what we do with that, or what we allow that to cause us to do, can be the issue. And that's Albert Barnes is saying there, the feeling we have when we're injured and which prompts us to defend ourselves when in danger. He further states that it is a natural feeling. I said it's an emotion. It's given to us for 2 reasons. Number one, it's a proper expression of our disapproval of a course of evil conduct. When somebody does something that maybe wrongs us, or we maybe spiritually would say, that makes me mad, that guy's going to go over there and lie, that if you give money to the church, everything will be okay. The Bible doesn't say that. That's a right, a just anger. He says that number 2, it is that we may defend ourselves when suddenly attacked. And this is known as the fight or flight response. If I'm walking along and Brother Dan steps out and says, boo, my fight or flight response will kick in. I'm either going to get mad and punch him in the face, or I'm going to run away. My fight or flight response when I'm scared or angry, or something's happened to me. Why? God's made us that way. So I can either run and protect myself and get away from the danger, or I can protect myself from it. And so anger is an emotion God's given to us to help us and in a sense protect us. When we get it out of line, we get out of balance, or that anger gets deep-seated and rooted for a wrong reason, it causes problems. When we're excited against sin, anger is lawful. Psalm 7:11 says that God is angry with the wicked. Is God wrong? No. So anger is not wrong in that sense. Jesus looked on the hypocritical Pharisee with anger. Mark 3:5. Is that wrong? No. So it is said, Ephesians 4:26, be ye angry and sin not. Is that wrong for us? There's a time and a place for anger. There's a time and a place and a way to deal with it. That is the key to it. The anger or indignation against sin is not what our Savior speaks of here. What he condemns here is anger without a cause. That is unjust, rash, hasty, getting mad or angry, where no offense has been given or intended. When we're just waiting for somebody to offend us, when we're just waiting for somebody to say something wrong, or we're just in one of them moods where when somebody says something, we just give them the wrath of Sam, right? We turn on them and we just chew their heads off. That's wrong. And so, in that case, it is evil and it's a violation of 1 John 3:15. He that hateth his brother is a murderer. And that's what Christ is saying here. The anger that's in your heart. When you turn in a way that you would say, I hate I would kill them, is what our heart would say. The next one, Jesus says that the real problem is in the heart. That the person has a feeling which would lead him to commit murder if it were fully acted out. And again, here the word brother simply means those that are, it could be an acquaintance, it could be a neighbor, it could be a co-worker, it may be a fellow Christian. It doesn't necessarily mean a sibling related by blood. Now look down at verses 27 and 28. We'll look at the adultery real quick. He says there, ye have heard that it was said by them of old, thou shalt not commit adultery. So those are the commands. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And so that man that looks on her to lust after her, we would only see it when he finally acts out on it. We see the symptom, but the root action is already in the heart. They've already made the decision. They've already committed the sin inside. We simply see it once it has been put out, right? Or it's made known. And so again, Jesus identifies a surface problem and a root problem. Adultery is actually a symptom of something deeper. There's something beneath the surface that causes the person to commit adultery. And he says that's the sin of lust. He hath lusted after her already in his heart, verse 28. If lust is dealt with and resolved, there wouldn't be adultery in the first place. I believe it's in James 1, where he says, we're tempted. But when we lust after that, when we allow that temptation to pull us in, to draw us in, and we begin to pursue that, now we're in trouble. And Satan has that little hook baited for us, and he's ready to just rip it. Right? When that hook gets in the fish's mouth, right, John? We give it all we got to land that fish. And Satan's just waiting, and he throws the bait out, and he watches and watches, and as soon as we look at it and begin to move towards it, he just begins to smile. And as soon as we bite that bait, he's got you. And so, but God says, look, it's not when you finally reeled you in. It's the minute you lusted after it and began to pursue it. So be careful. Adultery is the visible sign someone has a deeper problem, or that there's a deeper problem. In order to solve the problem, we must first be sure that we are treating the root cause of the problem and not simply the symptoms. Illustration would be that the red light on the dash. My truck has had a red light on the dash 5 or 6 years. I ignore it. I choose to ignore it. The truck runs fine. My brother says you're probably using more gas than you would if you fixed it, but it runs fine. The other option would be to do what my brother did, telling me to fix mine. They have inspections in Georgia, so you take the glass off the dash and you put some black tape over it so nobody sees it. Or option 3, fix it. Fix it, right? Sometimes what is indicated, though, isn't the real problem, and that's the problem with my truck. When I take it to AutoZone and they run the codes and they tell me it's such and such, and I don't remember, it's been so long, my brother says, no, it's your O2 sensor. But this guy says it's some this, and this. No, it's because your O2 sensor is bad. It causes that to read wrong, and so it gives you the code for that. So my symptom is what the code's telling me. My real problem is my O2 sensor. And so, again, it's a simple or silly example of, listen, Christian, there's some red light warnings on our dash. We make the choice. I'm going to ignore it. I'll cover it up so nobody sees it. Or we fix it. We get it right with God. And that is always going to be the best case. Get it right. Confess it, David said. Make it right. Acknowledge your sin. Come in line with God. Agreeing with Him that it is sin. It is wrong. Make that right. And again, as we said in Jonah this morning, God's a God of second chances. God is a God of mercy and grace. He will forgive you. He will cleanse you from all unrighteousness. He'll put you back on the right path, and you can enjoy your Christian walk again. And I don't know how to say it any simpler or any other way, so we'll close here.